Greetings and welcome to the RC Wallet Vacuum channel. In a previous, about a week ago video I did on this here Rovan 450 XLT with with this OBR engine. It ended up being more of a feasibility study to see if it was actually going to be feasible to fit in this 450 XLT chassis, and it also applies to the Rovan LT truck and the King motors and 3 Degree North trucks. I think they all probably come on the same Chinese factory or thereabouts. So at the time, Losi or OBR had been listing this engine as fitting in only the Losi 5T 1.0, and I kind of shied away from getting it for a while. And finally, decided to get it and see what happened. I figured it'd be a good project, even if it didn't work. It'd be a good project to actually figure out how to make it fit. And turns out after testing it, it actually is going to be a great combination. I haven't talked to Sean about it, and he may have upgraded his or changed his website to reflect that it will fit these vehicles. So when I started this project, the plan was to just do a video chronicle the modifications that fit the OBR 47cc engine and chassis and the Rovan chassis. And then I was going to do all the driveline and chassis upgrades to the 5T 1.0 parts, aftermarket parts, off screen. But as I started with it, turned out that there was more involved with it than I originally planned, and enough that I think it's probably worth to document those changes, so anyone wants to do something like this, you got some kind of reference. So I split the video, I redid the video a little bit and split it up. So the first section is on the rear differential, then I do the center differential, and then I do the front differential, then to the engine, and some other miscellaneous things. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of some of the parts I got to upgrade the chassis and driveline. I don't have a 5T 1.0, I only got the 2.0, so I don't have a vehicle up here to measure to. But one thing I noticed is I got this Team Chase. It's supposed to be the rear drive, drive shaft coming off the center differential. Clearly not the right one. I mean, there's not even close to being able to reach in there. So I don't know if there's a difference between the length of this 450 XLT chassis and a 5T 1.0, or I just got the wrong part. I did from Innovative RC, got this one. It's supposed to be for the front, and this clearly it will fit in the front. So we're good to go on that one. I also got from Chase the hardened ones for coming off the outputs of the differentials, but unfortunately I can only get one set, so I'm only going to be able to change one set today. So in the front and rear differentials, I'm going to run some 500K differential fluid, and then in the center I'm going to run a 1 million. One note, if you have these Rovans, they do not for some reason put differential fluid in there. They only run grease. So if you ever buy one of these, you really want to take the thing apart and get the grease out and put differential fluid in there. So I do have RC Max front and rear differential housings. I'm going to stick with the actual differentials on the Rovan for now to see how they hold up. I did get the rear hubs. I haven't got the front hubs and spindle sets yet. I haven't been able to find them. And one of the things that you're going to need probably for the engine upgrade is going to be this some sort of increased fuel flow kit. I got this full force in the Kraken, so I decided to get it for the OBR. And what else is in here? Oh, the dual steering servo, and I may end up trying to run this setup and run it right straight off the battery. But we'll see how that goes. That's kind of a separate subject. So as I alluded to earlier, I got these RC Max differential housings, and they do such a beautiful job on these things. But anyhow, they do. I didn't get the shock towers for them because I wasn't sure, once again, not knowing what's up with the 5T 1.0's dimensions. I wasn't sure if these towers, the 5T 1.0 towers would be wide enough to fit in this 450 XLT. So I stuck with the stock towers, plus I already had it set up for the roll cage. But anyhow, they do allude to the fact that, or they do mention that you got to do some Dremel work on these, and I don't know if the camera's going to focus in there, but it does have to come down. But all you got to do is basically, I'm just going to stick the thing in the mill and shave that off into this corner, and other than that, it should drop in there good. So off to the mill. So you got to take a little bit of material off there, but it's not too bad. It works good with a mill versus like a Dremel. Here's an FYI for anybody who's looking to upgrade your Rovan truck, 450 XLT or whatever the case may be, to these RC Max differential housings. In this case, the rear one. This is the stock Rovan differential assembly and the stock Rovan pinion gear doesn't want to fit right in this RC Max housing. When the differential is held down all the way, the pinion will not drop down into its spot there. This whole assembly is forced down too close to the pinion. So there's really only a couple. I don't want to modify the RC Max parts, so there's only got other couple options. And I'm going to start by trying to, I don't know if I'm going to be able to see this in the camera, but machine that face off down there to force this whole differential assembly back this way. If it goes back a millimeter or so, it should drop in there. I got enough. I think I got enough material in there to face that off of there. Leave a little ridge for the inner race on the bearing that's tucked down inside of here to catch, and still have clearance so this is not hitting this. And if worse comes to worse, I think I'm going to actually machine this housing back in. This is pretty thick, so I should be able to machine back in a little ways, and as long as I end up with that little ridge down there by the inner race of the bearing. So I'm going to over the lathe and see what I can get to this thing to fit in here. So I got the differential housing machine down. It fits in there good now. Got enough clearance for the inner race to catch. And everything drops in and runs real smooth now. But of course, there's always some kind of trade-off. So over here on this side, the stock, not the stock, but the bearing carrier supplied by RC Max now doesn't clear. That's since everything's shifted over. You can see there's quite a gap. This face here just barely touches the housing. So I got some 1¼ bar, aluminum bar. I'm going to stick it in the lathe and actually make a new one of these and extend it out the, I don't know, 3/16 of an inch or so it needs to fully contact that the housing. So off to the lathe for that one. Well, it's partway done. A couple more processes and then should be ready to fit it in there. So the part's on the lathe now. All I had to do is add on, make that part, increase it from the size of that part. Let's put the bearing in there and reassemble everything. So new bearing carrier's in there now, and spins freely. And you can see I got a lot more contact surface there than maybe before. I actually got a little overhang, but I ain't gonna worry about that. Everything runs smooth. I don't see any issues. The dog bone pins are not going to hit that. I've already checked that. So I'm just putting this thing together and see what else comes up. So one of the joys of dealing with Rovan is always fixing the problems I got with him. I didn't have yet the ability to get any upgraded out drives for this particular vehicle yet. So I have to deal with the stock Rovan. So this is our stock dog bone setup, and I have a Chase hardened drive cup in there, and as you can see, they clearly don't go in there. Here's a stock Losi that goes all the way in there, no problem at all. This one ain't happening. So I'm going to have to go through and pop these pins off of here, press them out, put these in the lathe, clean these up, get them down till they're clear, and then press in some new D2 drill rod, 5mm drill rod in there for drive pins. I don't know why they have these issues. This is the same issue I had in the front end on this thing when I first got it, and it chewed up the drive cups. And now that I see the back's going to have the same issue. At least it must be the stock Rovans are open so much farther up in there to clear. So that's the next issue. And then also these hinge pins. I ended up putting in a Losi hinge pin kit. I believe it's an LOSB 2080 or something like that. And of course the Rovans are a slight bit longer for some reason. They're also a lot softer. But then they also have these little spacers in here in the front. I'm going to pull them out and hopefully it doesn't cause an issue with the center drive shaft being not fitting. But so I'll actually try to fix these dog bones. So in order to get these stock rear Rovan out drives to fit with the hardened Chase cups and the new differential setup, I went ahead and knocked out the pins, the drive pins, and I'm going to take and I got it in the lathe. And I'm going to take and hand file the balls down to get them to slide into the cups right. And then I'm going to drill and tap the end for a set screw and set in a new hardened Losi pin and anchor it that way. I'll probably have to do the same with the fronts, but start off with the rears. So I got them out of lathe now, they're all filed down, and fits in there really good now. So we're ready to drill and tap the ends. So a little change of plans now that I got these things filed down so they'll fit the cups. The pins are going to press in there pretty tight. I wasn't sure if after I pressed them out it would open the hole up a little bit and I'd have to crank them down with the set screw, but I don't have a reamer to clear for this, make a clearance for this pin, so I'm just going to press these, go out to the press these back in, and should be fine as is. Saves me some time on the lathe drilling and tapping for grub screws. So there's what you want. It slides in there good now. And those are hardened Losi pins. So eventually, once Gap Racing gets their parts out, we'll try those. Otherwise, I'll go with Todd from RC Ohio's advice with the using stock MTXLs. But hopefully, this will get me up and running. Now I'll put the differential back out. I'm gonna be putting 500K in that, and then reassembling it. And hopefully, that's the only problem I have with the back. And I'll move off to the center. Take care of that problem, and the front differential and its problems, and then the engine's going to go in. Another FYI, upgrading these RC Max with the Rovan parts. I have these bonehead carbon fiber hinge pins, and they fit in there fine, but the Rovan cover goes over top that interferes, so you will have to cut out, take a little space off of there. Take a little material off, and I'm just going to use a knife. I'm not going to get fancy with it. So there's nothing to be straightforward with this upgrading a Rovan to Losi 5T parts. The latest is these Taylor hub carriers. There's like 15.8 millimeters across there, and the mating part on the Rovan is 16 millimeters. So I'm going to be building new camber links for this later this summer. So I don't want to modify the Taylor parts, so I'm just going to take a cheat and grind these ball joints flat on the belt sander, get them down and fit them and take care of it that way. So the next upgrade is going to be to the center differential. I'm going to keep the stock Rovan center differential. I've already had it apart and added 1 million differential fluid in there. But I'm going to replace the towers, and I'm going to replace them with this fast lane machine FLM 31000. It's a split setup for the 5T 1.0. I'm going to be adding the RCR brakes. They seem a lot heavier duty. That came out of DDM Motors, SM602. There's some weight to that. This seems to be a heavy pig when I'm all said and done with it. And then I don't like the way the 5T 1.0 brakes attach, where they just thread into the tower. I've had them snap off already. So what I do is I get the 5T 2.0 that threads through and uses a captive nut. But what I got to do is I got to machine off the back side of the towers on either one, both sets, and to make clearance for the nylon lock nut. So hopefully that's all I got to do with that, and I'm going to get going on that now. Run the mill. And the other thing I upgraded too is the drive cups. I went with some Team Chase hardened drive cups on there. So the first order of business is you're going to have to open up the holes on these brake pads to deal with the 5T 2.0 shoulders. Both ends will have to be opened up. And as well as the holes are going to have to be open to 6 millimeter. That's relevant to the outside pads. The inside pads actually got to be open to 6.5, or actually a little under 6.5. 6.5 would be fine, but you don't want to really go much over top of that. Because what ended up happening is since these mount differently, the 1.0s, the bolts thread into there, and there's a locked locked screw that goes down to the bottom, ties that in place. These 5T 2.0s actually, they're in there almost as a pin-like situation. So there's a little bit of play between the centers there. So to make up for that little bit of play, you got to open these inside holes to a little bit bigger so you can still move that in and out. Otherwise, it's going to bind up if you just do 6 millimeter. It's always something. So I'm having mixed results today with Murphy and his damn law about whatever can go wrong will go wrong. I believe I'm getting lucky with these bolts here. I don't believe I'm going to have to mill off anything on these towers to get the nuts to clear. I think I'm going to clear that gear without a problem. I don't see where the fast lane uses a bearing, so I'm going to stick with a Rovan, which does have a bearing built into it. And it does seem like that meshes up. So I got everything all back together, and it seemed like it's going to fit good, but once you start clamping down the top up there, all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the brake discs were binding up. Coming up in there, touching up on them springs and sticking in place. Let me get the back here. They were coming up in there, they're touching up in the, hitting up on them springs. I get this camera to focus. And so the other issue I had too is I had to run an India stone across these to get these slide on there pretty good. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to put these things in the lathe and try to take some of this edge off of here, take some of the diameter off of that thing, and try that and see how that works. And as a lesson for all you out there on how not to run a lathe, I'm going to give you an example. So since these weren't going to be too easy to chuck up in this lathe, I actually am using the old drive cups from the Rovan to hold the disc in there. And I got a bolt pinched down in there and squeeze down in and hold it tight. And it shouldn't be that big deal. I just got to shave a little bit off the outside of that. As long as I'm going there slow, it shouldn't be too much of a problem, but this one might be one for the safety glasses. So I got the two of them in there chucked up right now. I'm going to probably take off, I bet, close to 1/8 of an inch maybe across the diameter of it. Well, it seems to be a lot of extra material in there. I'm not sure why this doesn't mesh up properly, but it definitely ain't going to cooperate. Luckily they're not hardened, or at least they're not very hard. So the disc, I got them out of the lathe now. I'm cleaned up, deburred, and well, it's nice and smooth now. It would just completely bind up before it was a no-go. It did take quite a bit of material off there. And I guess, as we were saying earlier, you definitely got to have 6.5 millimeter thereabouts holes in those inner brake discs so they can slide in and out without binding up. And probably just go through now and drop the set screw down in there, even though it really is necessarily needed in this case. But I may or may not put it in there. So I'm going to drop this in the chassis and see how that lines up, and then off to the front differential. And that should be fun. So I got the front differential set in here now, and apparently Murphy and his damn law called in sick today on this one because everything drops in good. I don't have to do any changes to it, as I can tell. I know I'm going to be upgrading to the chase cups. And I'm going to put 500K in there, probably 500K. I might put some 300K in there, but I'll probably try with 500. So it looks like that's going to be good to go. So I'll finish putting this thing together and then off to the hubs and all that kind of stuff. So this front has been fairly problem-free. There's been some issues, but it's not as bad as the rear and the center one. I still have the same problem. I got to knock the pins out of this, put them both in the lathe and get those balls cleared down so I can get them to slide in and out of here properly, and then I'll have to repress in new pins. The other two is these two screws here, and then the two on the other side that hold this differential into these hinge pins. These bolts are going to have to be cut down, maybe 2-3 millimeters off of them. They're a little too long because these were the ones that were originally in the plastic, and RC Max didn't include new ones, so those have to be trimmed down. So the next step is to replace the spindle carrier and the steering knuckle. I have these from Hot Racing. They're aluminum anodized to black. Kind of want to keep the silver up in front, but whatever. I couldn't find any matching set that weren't that was a black anodized. The steering knuckle has a graphite or carbon fiber linkage coming off of there. Once summer's done and I'm going back to winter and put the tracks back on, I'm going to have to very carefully put these things in the mill and put the hole in there where I put the anti-rotation for the tracks. I'll deal with that come winter or come fall time. So I have all three differentials in the Rovan chassis plate now, and there's obviously some issues with bolt alignments. I'm going to get a camera to focus in there. They don't want to quite line up. This is the rear differential. The back two line up pretty well. The front two don't. The center differential, only one's off a little bit. That one right there. The front's a little more of an issue. If I get this thing to focus in here. But those two in the front, on the front differential, going to have to be opened up a little more. I have RC Max front differential on the Kraken and lined up fine on that plate, and I have one of these Fast Lanes center differentials on my Losi 5T 2.0 that also lined up on the differential or on the chassis plate without a problem. So it leads me to believe that, I don't know, maybe Rovan's numbers are a little wacky on their chassis plate drilling, but whatever, fix that. So now it has all the differentials and suspension systems set in there. And I got these hot racing front spindle assemblies. These things were ended up being flawless. I had no issues with these at all. They bearings dropped in there good. They dropped into the A arms with no problem. The kingpins all fit without a problem. Those were completely problem free. The only part of this has been problem free. Everything else has been a battle. The RC Max stuff, they don't supply any external hardware, and all the Rovan hardware doesn't fit. So that pretty much has to all be replaced. The front shock tower, I didn't have to do any milling on it, but I did have to open up these upper holes. Had to be opened up quite a bit. And so now I'm just ready to start setting the engine in there. I did get all the holes modified on the chassis plate to accept the differentials. The fronts were probably the worst, but the rear had some issues too, and the center. But that's taken care of, and so now I'll put the engine there and see what comes up with that. I already know the engine would fit in there without too much of a problem, but there is some modifications got to do. So let's get to that part. So I got the engine set back in here, and using the inserts from a Losi 5T 2.0, the 20 tooth ones in reverse, definitely is the way to go, because that's the gear mesh I get on the thing. It's definitely not binding up. It's pretty much a perfect gear mesh as far as I can tell. I do have to open up one of the chassis plate holes in the back for the engine. It's a little tight, but so after the next part of this, I think I'm gonna have to build a spacer for the brace. So we'll just work on that next. So it turns out it wasn't the Rovan chassis in this time. In this case, the Rovan's engine mount holes were perfectly aligned. The issue was one of OBR's threaded holes was a little screwed up in the mounting plate. This had to fix up with a tap a little bit, and good to go. So I'm getting down into the nitty gritty of putting the motor in place here. You can see the brace that goes up off, the Rovan brace goes off the center differential down to the servo. That sits up on top of OBR's engine brace. So there's quite a gap in there. So I'm just going to mill a block to fit down in there. And the only other issue I got is that gap there between the engine and the center differential. I'm just going to put little brass shims in there for now. That's one of those your mileage may vary type things. It may just be the way this chassis plate is on the Rovan. Places off a little bit more. And then the other issue I have on there, and this is kind of specific to this application only, since I got that fast lane split differential, it requires real long bolts to begin with. And once you put the Rovan brace and the OBR engine brace in there, stacks it up pretty high. So I have to go, I think I got like 62 millimeter length of threaded rod in there with nylon lock nuts topped on up on the top there. And eventually I'm going to replace it with longer Allen heads, but that's all I have right now. But that's only relevant if you have this fast lane. If you got a stock or some other non-two-piece center differential, the bolts won't be that much of an issue. So it's fitting in there pretty good. Definitely, at least so far, I haven't done the throttle mechanism yet. That might be some issues, but for the most part, mounting the engine, the OBR engine in this chassis is the simple part. It's the trying to upgrade the drive line to deal with the extra horsepower. It's complicated thing. So I'm gonna try to finish getting that part milled out and shimmed in there, and then I'm gonna work my way over to the throttle. So off to the mill. So I got the shim block cut and milled and drilled and put in place, and it's got that set in there now. And I had to go there's actually quite a gap there, and if I don't maintain between those two brace parts, if I don't keep that braced or gapped out like that, it definitely wants to bind up the gears. So right now it's I got probably close to 2 millimeter of spacing in there now, and that fits in pretty good. And next thing I got to work off to the throttle mechanism. So the throttle linkage is something that came with the engine. It just doesn't seem like it's going to work right. So I did rig this setup up in the lathe for now, and come up with something better later on. It's going to be kind of a trick because the center line of this lever actually drops below the outer diameter of the clutch housing there. But I'll come up with something eventually. This will work for now. So it's mostly wrapped up now. All the upgrades have been mostly done. I still got to replace the rear drive shaft. I got to get that. I think Fat Dad looks like that's back in stock, and then I got to wait for the out drives. I want to give it a test fire in a future video, and once I test fire it and get it running, then I'm going to pull the engine back out, put the kill switch in, and I don't want the thing to hit the ground until it's got a kill switch in it. And so next video, hopefully this thing will be running and tearing shit up. And I'm guessing the first thing is going to be tore up with them tires. I can see those things grading pretty quick, but stay tuned for some run videos of this thing as the weather improves. Thanks for watching.